Welcome to the Purpose Cycle podcast. This podcast helps listeners realize and manifest their dream lives. Here's a little taste of what we've got in store for you today.
I really feel like if I hadn't had that support, that I might have just gotten another job. Because you just don't have the perspective when you've got other people that really know what you're going through to say, I felt like that too. Try to get them to say, no, let's stop for a moment and acknowledge that this was amazing and you made this happen. Because a lot of times people that are super talented think that they're just average. What I also would say is like, allow your desires to emerge, allow them to live. Don't kill your dreams before they've been able to live in the world a little bit.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Purpose Cycle podcast. My guest today is the author of bestseller Winning the Game of Work. She is a corporate leader turned executive coach who helps overachievers who are successful but not satisfied find balance between professional success and personal happiness. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today, Terry McDougall. Terry, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I really appreciate you having me on today.
Thank you very much for joining us. Yeah, it's great to have you on. I'm just really interested to dig deep into the story because you're sort of underway in that journey of something that I'm really aspiring to do further on down the line and to understand the risks and the success that you've had. And it's going to be a fantastic episode.
Well, I will do my best to live up to that expectation.
Well, so first of all, I'd like you to just, in a couple of sentences, tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself.
Well, I'm an executive and career coach, and I'm the author of Winning the Game of Work, as you mentioned. Before I became a full-time coach, I worked in the marketing field for pretty much my whole career. The majority, I worked for about 30 years, and about 21 of those years I worked in financial services. So I worked for two large banks. And I eventually rose to lead marketing for the businesses that I worked in. And, that was pretty much the culmination of sort of my career aspirations in the corporate world. I'm also a mom and to three kids and a wife. I've been married for 25 years, which I'll tell you that sounds so strange to say that. I can't believe, I don't know where all the time went, but, and I think that what I'm doing now really in many ways comes from things that I learned in my own career. I was always very ambitious about moving up in my career, and I was a first generation college graduate. So I didn't really have anybody in my family that could guide me, onto the path of like, this is what you do to be successful. So I was always sort of studying and reading books. And at a certain point, I hired some coaches to help me get past some obstacles that I had in my career. And so, what I do now is help other people, I say expand the overlap between their professional success and their personal happiness, because I don't really think that you need to, sacrifice, your soul and your happiness in order to be successful professionally.
Amazing. Yeah. And I can't wait to dig deep into some of those points. And we talk about the aspiration, which is what you mentioned, and leaving that profession for something that you've been doing for a number of years. What were the external or internal triggers that made you want to go into coaching?
Well, it's funny because I've been asked that. And when I really look back over my whole life, I realized that I think it was probably in me from even childhood, because I'm the oldest of four girls. And so being the big sister, I just was naturally always helping my younger siblings. And, my parents relied on me to sort of help out in that way. And I liked doing it. And I also liked helping people at school. So I was a good student, and a lot of times I would understand the concepts pretty quickly at school. And if one of my classmates was having a hard time understanding it, that, I felt good about stepping in and saying, oh, well, I think of it this way, and, helping them to understand and come along. And even when I got out of college, I I would help people with their resumes and stuff like that. I just liked doing that kind of thing. And as I mentioned, I had hired coaches a couple times in my own career to help me. So I understood how getting somebody that can kind of either guide you on a path that you've never walked on or help you look at obstacles that are in front of you in a different way so that you can find a way to get past it. I knew that it worked. So that was sort of like the ground in which the seed was planted. And in terms of what brought me to the impetus of where I actually, took the jump. I think of it this way, like I was sort of flying around in this airplane, which was like my corporate job. And I kept like looking out the window and feeling like I want to jump, like I was going to parachute. And I was like, I really wanted to, but I felt scared. I just felt like, oh, if I take this leap, that I'm just going to go splat on the tarmac. And but something happened over the course of the last couple of years at my last job where, I worked at my last job for 12 years. And in that time, I had 4 different jobs. And that was great. I mean, I was able to like move into different areas. I was able to stay challenged and I really enjoyed that. But the last job that I had there, I didn't really want that job, to tell you the truth. And when my boss first came to me about taking it, I said no. But she sort of, in some ways, coerced me into taking it. And so I did. And it never really felt like a good fit. And because of some of the things that were going on in the company, it was, I wasn't very happy in the role. And so I'd say for like the last 2 years, I really felt stressed. I didn't feel like I was really set up for success. And because of some things that were going on in the organization, kind of a restructuring, I was able to leave the company, on good terms. And I was in a position that I could leave without a job. And so I decided to take a little bit of time off to sort of like detox a little bit from those years of not being very happy. And I fully thought that I'd get another job, but I just wanted to take a little time to relax and rest and sort of figure out what direction I wanted to go in next. And while I had that time off, I thought, okay, what are some things that I think I would enjoy doing? And I also thought like, well, what am I good at and what do I like to do? And as a marketing leader, I had always had, for years I had teams of people reporting to me, and I always thought that it was worthwhile to invest in the mentoring and the coaching of people that reported to me. I mean, it just made sense. It felt good that I was helping somebody else grow, but also, selfishly, it helped me. I mean, if you have good, smart people that know what they're doing reporting to you, it only helps you. You can't be successful as a leader if people aren't doing a good job under you. And so I had actually gotten feedback from people that they thought I was good at it. And some people had actually moved with me as I had moved into different roles. They'd be like, oh, okay, there's an opening on your team. I want to come work with you there. So that was really fulfilling. So I got the coaching certification. Again, my view at the time was like, okay, these are great skills. When I get closer to retirement, I'll have these skills and maybe I can start my own practice then. Maybe, when I get my next job, I'll use those skills in my next job, but maybe I'll have a couple of private clients on the side. But when I was going through the training, I was surrounded by a lot of other people, many of whom had also been in corporate careers. And a lot of them were like, I'm going to start my own business. And so just being around a lot of other people who were ready to take the risk and willing to do that, it just inspired me. And I thought, what the heck, I'm just going to try it. And if it doesn't work out, I can always get another job, but I might not always be in a position where I'm ready to go for it.
Yeah.
So that was back in 2017. And I started, working with clients in 2017 before I finished my certification, but I finished my certification 3 years ago this month. And so, I've been really doing this full time in earnest for 3 years.
Amazing. And you talk there about having been a leader for so long already. If we take it right back to the beginning of your career in corporate, then did you learn quite a lot from the leaders that you had early on in your career as you started to make your way to those positions? And
yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and sorry, also, in terms of that, did you have any bad examples, good examples that you could reflect from? I've read a lot of Simon Sinek's books, and he talks about being the leader that you wish you had. Did you have any examples of that in which you thought, this is how I do it, and this is how I don't do it?
Yes, absolutely. And I feel like I've probably learned as much from the people that were really bad bosses as from the people that were good bosses. Um, my very first boss, my first job was at a publishing company, and I worked in the advertising sales department as an assistant to the salespeople. And my boss was the sales manager. And, funny enough, I was 22 years old, and I really liked my boss. He was kind to me, and I felt like gave me a really good opportunity. He had told me he was planning on promoting me to, marketing coordinator, and I was so excited about that after having kind of paid my dues for a year or so. And unfortunately, I write about this in my book too. We got a new president of the company. It was like kind of a small publishing company. Maybe there were like 60 people in the company, and the owner wanted to sort of step back, so she hired a president to run it. And unfortunately, my boss got in a tiff with the new president, and he got fired. I mean, it was one of those ones where, like, he had to leave like immediately.
Mm.
And I was so upset that day that I actually had to go home early.
Mhm.
I just, I mean, it's like it's sort of like, your work family. He was almost
Yeah,
like my work dad. And it was like, oh, my parents split up or something, and he was just gone. And I was just really, really upset. But that was sort of one of my first, you know, views, I guess, that the corporate world is, it can be very fast changing, and,
mm,
you got to be agile, and you have to be ready. And, I think that there were a lot of things that I learned from the guy's name was Dennis,
mm,
um, about, the faith that he showed in me and the other people on the team. But I also learned from him that, like, don't tangle with the boss, right? Like,
mm.
don't argue with the new president, right? Because he's not going
Yeah,
to put up with that. Um, and yeah, that was super interesting. I mean, he actually sued the company for wrongful termination, and I got deposed. I mean, it was
wow.
crazy.
Yeah,
But I've had a number of really good bosses that were good mentors. Like, I'll give you another example of, a few years after that. I was probably in my like mid to late 20s, and um, I worked in the marketing department of this insurance administrator, and I was the person that sort of was over the materials that were in the warehouse, like the marketing materials. And if anybody needed them, they would come to me, and I would, go to, or like call the warehouse and tell them to ship them or whatever. And I had a whole system like of, okay, fill out this form and blah, 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 blah. And I remember this senior vice president in New York. I was in Washington, D.C. at the time. He called me, and he asked me to ship some materials. And and here I'm like 27, and I'm like, okay, well, let me tell you what the process is for this. You have to fill out this form, and you have to do this and this and this. And he was like quiet, and he said, okay, thank you very much. And I'd say like 5 minutes later, the head of the department, it was my boss's boss, comes walking over to me, and he sort of like bends down and like talks to me really quietly. Like, he wasn't really whispering in my ear, but he talked to me like really quietly, like real close. And he was like, Terry, when Steve Lovell calls you and asks for something, you just give it to him. You don't make him fill out any forms. And that just kind of opened up my eyes to sort of like the power dynamic
yeah.
within organizations,
Mm.
that if you're like a little 27-year-old, peon within the organization, that the guy who's bringing in all the revenue, you don't tell him how things are. He tells you how things are. And one of the things I learned, that boss's name was Mac. And the thing I learned about him was like how kind he was, because he could have called me in his office. He could have yelled at me. He could have done so many things, but it made such a big difference for him to come and just, gently tell me that's not the way you do it. And that made so much more of an impression on me than if he had, sort of called me on the carpet, because I mean, quite frankly, I just didn't know any better, you know?
Yeah. And that goes along with sort of knowing the person, right, who you're speaking to, and knowing your colleagues, knowing your team really well. And I remember actually in the research for this podcast seeing the story about Dennis. That's the opening part of your book, isn't it?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so
it is.
so yeah, I am looking forward to purchasing the book and reading it in full, because it's a great start. If you don't mind me
Yeah,
saying it, it's a pretty
yeah.
gripping start. So yeah, it's all about sort of knowing your team. And I'm wondering how much from when you left the sort of commercial world did you learn about the leadership from a different viewpoint once you stopped being in the leader's shoes, and then you took a step out and could see it. How much did you learn after that?
Well, I mean, I'm always learning, and one of the things I would say that I learned when I went through the coach training program that was eye-opening to me is that I thought that I was a good coach just because I'd worked in the corporate world for
Yeah.
a long time, and I had really like counseled and coached and mentored a lot of people. But when I was formally trained, I realized how many things I was doing wrong. That there are ways to do things that you get better results. I mean, I got results, but you could get so much better results actually being trained.
Yeah.
I didn't mention another boss that I had, but he's somebody that uh, I think probably was one of the most important mentors that I had. And, I was actually probably in my late 30s when he became my boss. And I had been moving up in my career, but not really to like the leadership level. I had maybe like one or two people reporting to me, but I wasn't like running a department or a team or anything like that. And for whatever reason, like he recognized that I was smart, and he was new to the company, and so he relied on me a lot to help him understand some of the interrelationships within the organization. But because he relied on me, I was able to sort of ask him a lot of things about, or I would make comments about like, well, I don't really understand why this person's doing this. And he in many ways pulled back the curtain on really what's going on, because I'd say, well, that person reports to that person, like they seem to be really chummy. And, and he's like, no, those two are competing for the role above them. He really made me see things more in the way that they really are. It was kind of like I was learning the rules of the game.
Yeah.
And so in many ways, I feel like he was the person that taught me about, how to look for what motivates people and to understand leadership. He was actually a very good leader in terms of, what he expected of me. And I learned a lot there that I used as I became a leader. So, I mean, I know that's a long way of answering your question about like how much have I learned since I left about leadership. I feel like I got a really, really good foundation in the corporate world. But one of the things that I suppose has been sort of eye-opening as I've worked with people in different functional areas and different industries is honestly how common a lot of the patterns are that people have might have trouble with in high or corporate roles where there's really high expectations.
Yeah.
And um, I think that when I'm able to share with them, well, you're not the only one, right? Like this is a very, very common issue that people, that get to a high level of leadership have issues with. I think that's very reassuring to people, because I think a lot of times whenever they seek out a coach, that, the reason why they have is because they've tried really hard on their own to get past an obstacle, and maybe they've hit the wall numerous times and they're like, okay, I can't break through. So like, what do I do? And in a lot of times there's even like a little, I don't know, I'm not going to say, well, I will say shame, but I'm not sure if that's the right word. But I think sometimes people that are used to a high level of success, if they can't break through an obstacle, they start having doubts about themselves or worrying that maybe they're not good enough or something like that. And whenever I tell them like, no, that's actually a really common um, situation or pattern, And there are ways that you can either shift your mindset to see your situation differently, or, here's a set of skills that we can work on so that you're using your time more effectively, or you're influencing or communicating more effectively. And and I think people feel really relieved when they realize, like, oh, okay, and also that leadership doesn't necessarily come naturally. Like, it's really an area that needs to be developed. And I think that as people are moving up in their careers, a lot of times they'll look at somebody who's very well established and just assume that that person sort of got on the escalator and like just went smoothly to the top.
Mm.
And when I talk to people about what's really going on with them, or I interviewed a lot of people in my book about their career journeys. When you really listen to what people have been through, you realize, like, no, really hardly anybody just gets on the escalator and skates to the top of their profession. It takes some work. Like, you may get to a plateau and then you can't figure out how to get to the next step, so you might have to do a little soul searching or develop some skills or something to get to the next level.
Yeah, and I'm assuming then, with the experience that you've accumulated in the corporate world, that was you were able to deliver empathy. I mean, I know I can see a lot on the internet of 22-year-old business coaches who advertise, and I can get you amazing results, but they haven't lived the corporate world. Yes, they want to be coaches, but they haven't had the experience and been in there at various different levels as well. So the clients can't really draw from that experience. And that takes us to the next level of the purpose cycle, the next stage, which is the realization. And becoming a coach probably gave you many different realizations. And I talk about four mainly, which is the task-oriented realization. I already think you've covered that, in the sense of, I think it came quite naturally to you to lead. So that wasn't necessarily an issue. So I want to talk about environmental realization. So the realization of your current setup. So like you say, you were a wife, a mother. So you mentioned, obviously, when you left, you took some time off anyway. Was there
Mm-hmm.
any pressure for you to go out and make sure you built a successful coaching business, or was it something that you had, thankfully, the time and the family's set up with, obviously, your husband,
Mm-hmm.
to naturally and organically develop this idea?
I would say, we had money in savings, and so I had some time. But like I mentioned earlier, you mentioned earlier, I have 3 kids,
Mm,
and when I left my job, my oldest son was in college, and my second son was like coming up on, he was I think a junior in high school.
yeah.
So we had to take that into consideration. And I will also tell you that the way that our family, what we did when we moved to Chicago 15 years ago, before we moved, my husband and I both worked actually for the same bank. And when I got recruited for a pretty big job here in Chicago, and it was, gave me a nice bump in compensation and everything. And our children were pretty young at the time. And we went from living in sort of a smaller city where you could balance everything. We could both work. I had a 5-mile commute with the school and the daycare between home and work. So it's very,
Mm,
I mean, I literally could walk to my kids' daycare from work if I had to. So it was manageable. But moving to a big area like Chicago, I live 20 miles from the city, but if I were to drive that, it would probably take me an hour and a half during rush hour. And so we moved to a community where there's a train station, and so I would just take the train every day.
right.
And my youngest child was 2 when we moved here. I know it's a long story, but we decided to have my husband stay home with the kids,
Right.
because we just didn't feel like we could come up with, like, who's going to watch the kids. And if something happened, it would take a long time to get home on the train and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So that was honestly a little bit of a risk. I partly felt because, like, I wasn't sure how he would feel about himself, being the stay-at-home dad, but he loved it. He was really good at it. Um, but when I left my job, he actually had started a business, a photography business, but it was really part-time, and it wasn't going to like pay all of our bills. And he was supportive of me at first, but then at some point I think he thought I was gonna be like, okay, now I'm ready to get a job. And at one point he was like, when are you gonna get a job? Why don't you just get another job? And I just, in my gut, did not feel like that was the right path for me. And I kind of stood my ground. We did argue over it a little bit, but I think he sort of woke up and thought, okay, if I'm not comfortable with this, I'll go get a job. So he did. He went back into banking. And so now I'm running my business out of home. He's working, and he likes it. I mean, he's happy to be back working, and our kids are, plenty old enough that, I mean, I just have the one that's still in school, and she's 17. So it's not like, they're all pretty self-sufficient.
Yeah. So the perfect time then environmentally to sort of to give it a try. And one thing you said there about, you knew that this is what you were going to do, just drew me towards another quote from your book. And it was where the more you listen to yourself and follow your own instincts, the happier you'll be. And I really liked
Yeah.
that, because it really did resonate with me there. And what I'm trying to do as well, building the purpose cycle. Moving on, then, you mentioned about the realization of others as well, which is one of the other strands you mentioned about your husband, and that support you got. So we'll move on to the realization of self. Was there anything that you had to realize about yourself, because you've probably gone from a world where it's very, very fast paced, and you're very organized. You've got your day maybe in an organizer, or your team are telling you what's coming up
Hmm.
next.
Hmm.
Now you're at home trying to run your own business. What sort of habits did you have to implement to make sure you was just as efficient?
Well, I mean, there are certainly some, technological tools that were really critical for me to put in place. And I will tell you about, I have Acuity Scheduling as my calendar program. And in the beginning, I don't know what I thought. I thought like, oh, there's a perfect calendar program. And it took me like months to pick one. And when I look back, I'm like, oh man, you should have just picked anyone. They're all pretty much the same. And when I think about how much time I wasted, if somebody wanted to meet with me, I'd have to go in and like, okay, these are all the days and times I have available. And so having that, if it's not on my calendar, it doesn't happen. And having that, like, where it automatically sends out reminders and all of that's really great. um, I started a mastermind with people from my coaching program when I first got out of the program, and that's been really, really helpful, because when you're a solopreneur, it can get lonely. And also, if maybe you haven't gotten any new clients in a while or something like that, you can really start feeling doubtful um, and down. And then on top of that too, if you're running your own business, there's like a lot of like different things that you might try. Like, I've worked with some different lead generation agencies and stuff like that to help me identify people that might be good clients for me. And so just having other people that are also coaches and entrepreneurs to share things with, and to be there to support me and for me to support them, that's been really great. And I really look back and think, if I hadn't had those people, I mean, I still meet with them. We meet once a week, or I mean, once every 2 weeks for an hour. And we just, kind of share what's going on, like what our goals are. We celebrate if we have anything great going on. If we'll often do like a hot seat if somebody's got an issue, like they'll just tell everybody what the issue is, and we'll all kind of share our ideas on what they can do. I really feel like if I hadn't had that support, that I might have just gotten another job,
Yeah.
because you just don't have the perspective when you've got other people that really know what you're going through to say, I felt like that too, but I just got a new client and I'm so excited. It
Yeah.
just, it's really helpful.
Yeah.
Some of the things that I already knew about myself, but that that you're sort of protected against within the corporate environment. I'm very much a shiny object person, and as the head of marketing, I I could be like that, because I could be somebody who was like always looking for opportunities and coming up with ideas and looking for innovative ways of doing things. And I had a staff that I could come up with the idea and then I could assign it to somebody else to do. One of the things I found as a solopreneur is that if I come up with an idea, I'm the one that has to do it.
Mm.
and and a lot of times that means that I am kind of chasing those shiny objects, and I'm not like stepping back and being a little bit more disciplined about, is that going to help my business right now,
Yeah.
and I think I just mentioned, I had a virtual assistant for a while, but for some good reasons I ended up not continuing working with her. And I actually just had a call this morning with somebody about um, engaging a virtual assistant again. And I think the timing is really good for me to be able to just offload a lot of the like more administrative and even some of the marketing things to give to somebody else to do,
Yeah.
so that I can focus on, like thinking, identifying potential clients, having, sales conversations, that kind of thing, on top of obviously delivering the service that people pay me to do, which is coaching.
Yeah. Wow. There's so much in there that I can begin to resonate with anyway. Like I said, this is definitely a field that I'm looking to explore. And um, I love the way you said about the mastermind group. And earlier in the podcast, you mentioned about the coaches. It's a very British thing to think I can do it by myself. There's seems to be this block with a stereotypical British culture of I'm
Mhm.
fine, and you sort of look outward and think it must be their problem, or you don't look inward. So I try and make a big focus on realization. So what would you say to specifically UK listeners who are wanting
Mhm.
to go on that journey as a solopreneur and want to maybe consider forming a mastermind kind of group?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that is a very American way of looking at things as well,
Yeah,
Um, but I would say that you don't have to, there's enough that you're going to have to do on your own.
yeah,
So why not find some fellow travelers that are going in the same direction that you're going in and just share the journey with them?
yeah,
um, because I mean, I've learned so much. I've gotten introduced to people. I have like my own business, but I actually work with some other companies that will send me clients. And some of the people in my mastermind group have actually introduced me to those companies,
yeah,
so they helped me get another stream of income for my business that I wouldn't have had. I never would have even known about those companies. And it's always helpful if somebody says, oh, here, meet Terry. She's a great coach. And I know her from my coach training program. And, getting a warm introduction is
yeah,
helpful. And I would say there's just like tons of things like that. If somebody else has already explored, some software platform that you're considering, and they can kind of give you the pros and cons. And like I mentioned, just there for the support. But if somebody, I guess, is looking for, um, how do you identify those people? I'd say that, look for people that are willing to give and to be supported.
right,
We have had a number of people kind of come in and out of our group over the years that we've had it, and and there were some people that, they'd come onto the call late. They would dump all of their problems into the group. And then as soon as everybody helped them, they'd be like, oh, I got to go, and that wasn't a good fit.
no,
We really want people to be there to not only, be supported, but to support other people too. And I think that's a really important thing to look for, people that will reciprocate.
yeah, definitely surrounding yourself with positive people who obviously have a very ambitious nature, like you've mentioned you have, must be amazing for productivity and getting results. We're going to move on to the initiation phase now, and this is always the difficult part, the first step. Let's take it back to your first client, your first coaching client. How did that come about, and what were the feelings around it? Because there must be so many emotions just in the air.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny that, you talking about that, it really is taking me back. My first paid coaching client was referred to me by somebody that I used to work with. And, it's funny because like when he actually left the company before I did, but I always liked him. And, I got together with him for drinks and coffee a couple times, just maintained that relationship. And I was keeping him abreast of what I was doing after I left the company. And he had a friend who actually was an investment banker, and I had actually done marketing for investment banking. And I think that my friend recognized that this guy could probably use somebody to help him through sort of a transition in his life. He had some stuff going on at work, and he had some stuff going on in his personal life, and he needed somebody to, sort of help him sort it out and figure out his way forward. And so my friend was like, well, Terry knows investment bankers, like she worked in that environment. She knows that personality type and so forth. And so he introduced me to him, and I was excited because, I kind of had in my mind a certain price that I wanted to charge for my coaching. And I knew that not everybody was going to want to pay that. But I also knew like, okay, if I'm working with an investment banker, they're well compensated. And so I ended up having coffee with him, and I sort of like, I was a little bit nervous. I had like a notebook that I had like little, notes in to like make sure that I was covering everything I wanted to cover. And we got along really, really well. And I got a good understanding of his situation. And I got to the end and I was like, well, what do you think? And he's like, yeah, I would like to hire you. And the funny thing was that I was so nervous about the pricing conversation, like, okay, well, is this going to be too much? And he never even asked about the price. He liked me. He did make a good living. And he was like, yeah, I want to hire you. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll send you the coaching agreement. And I got home and I was like, oh my gosh, like what's, and then I thought, well, I obviously I'm gonna put the pricing in the coaching agreement. And if he doesn't like it, he'll let me know. But he signed it and he paid me, and that was, I'm very thankful that he was my first client, because that gave me a lot of confidence to say, yeah, this is in the realm of the value that you're going to be bringing to people.
Before we go into part 2 of the podcast, I want to make a big shout out to our sponsors, Suit Up Apparel. Suit Up Apparel are a menswear company that combines style and comfort, and all of their clothes ensure that you look great, perform great, but just feel even better. To perform at your best, you need to make sure that you have the balance of everything, and Suit Up Apparel makes sure that this happens. Purpose Cycle podcast listeners can get 20% off now with the code PURPOSE. Thank you all for your tremendous support in season 1, and I hope to do the same and get even more deals at the end of season 2. So check out the website, suitupapparel.co.uk. That is suitupapparel.co.uk. Remember, stay sharp and suit up.
Yeah, it's always a difficult, awkward conversation, especially towards the end when money's involved and it's coming. It sort of builds up towards the end, and you're sort of waiting for that question. But it's great that obviously he must have been able to resonate with your experience and think, right, I think this is the right move for me. And it's great to see how open-minded he was as well. I want to talk about another sort of first step as well now, which is the book. And so how did that come about? How did that first step happen?
Well, it's a slightly long story, like all of my stories. When I first left my job, and I mentioned I sort of like needed to detox a little bit, and I had a lot of things that it was weird. I would like wake up in the morning and I would have all these thoughts, and sometimes I would just grab my phone and I'd actually write a blog post. I started a blog, and so I actually was blogging, really putting out a blog about every 2 weeks for a couple of years. just on work topics, on lessons I learned, on observation, so forth. And people were responding really well to it. And somewhere along the line, somebody said, "Gosh, you've been blogging for 2 years. Like, how many words do you have? Because you might have enough for a book." So that was the first time that it just occurred to me, like, wow, like I could have enough for a book here. And around the same time, maybe a little bit after that, a friend of mine called me and she was like, "Oh, I'm so excited. I'm writing a book." And I was like, "Okay, tell me all about it." She was in a book writing program. And so she introduced me to the guy that was running the book writing program, and I decided to sign up too. And so that was really, really helpful because they guided you through all of the steps of, writing the book, how to structure the book. I had editors that worked with me. The book writing program was affiliated with what they call a hybrid publisher, which is a publishing company that works with self-published authors. So, I mean, it was really a very fantastic program. And going back to what you were saying earlier about how people in the UK feel like they can just, they can do things on their own. I really thought like, oh, I can figure out how to write a book on my own. I really had this idea like, oh, I could just figure that out myself. And if I had gotten to a point where, okay, I'm ready to write a book, I would have tried to do it on my own. And after having gone through the book writing program, I'm really glad I did not try to do it because there's a lot more to it than what you see from the outside. And there are so many blind alleys that I never would have known about. And it was very helpful to have experienced people guiding me through the process.
Definitely something I need to consider then myself, as I'm currently writing a book, and something I've never thought of. So it's so glad that you've mentioned it. And there'll be a lot of listeners out there who are in that sort of initiation phase, beginning something, and maybe straying towards those blind alleys and not realizing whether it's a book or a podcast or anything else. So yes, really, really interesting there. So that takes us to the creation phase and the day-to-day of what you do now and what you sort of want to build towards as well. And I just want to even go back into, first of all, the coaching, but then also the book and what that creation phase was like as well, because it seems like we've got sort of two parallel sort of
yeah, definitely. They definitely feed off of each other. I will tell you that.
Yeah. So what was the day-to-day creation phase like then, as a coach, first of all?
I think that there's two parts of it, right? It's finding the clients, and I will tell you that maybe in the last 6 months or so, I mean, part of it is probably because my business is getting more mature. I'm not sweating it as much about finding new clients, because one of the things I find is that the clients that I like working with the best tend to find me. They get referred to me, or they come through some channel that I really didn't have a lot to do with. I wasn't out there actively looking for them. They kind of found their way to me. So I've recently stopped worrying as much about the business development part. I still do some things, but I just don't worry about it as much, and that's great. But I mean, that is definitely part of the business, is having those calls with people that want to find out whether you're the right fit for them. But in the actual coaching engagements, I really kind of follow like a five-step program with people, and it really starts with getting very clear on what their goal is, because a lot of times what drives people to coaching is that there's just something that doesn't feel right. They feel uncomfortable about something. They might actually be having a lot of pain about something. That maybe they've gotten promoted and they feel a little anxious about whether they're going to live up to the expectations in that new role. So it's really getting clear on that. And then it's about, okay, well, if that's your goal, what's the roadmap going to look like for us to get there? And then once we have done that, we'll look at, okay, what skills do you need to develop, in order to be able to, go on this journey towards that goal. I don't know if this is really a step, but this is a very important part of what I do with coaching. And I call it like the environments part of coaching, meaning that I give them a safe place to come talk about what's going on with them. And I'll tell you that a lot of times people do not have that. If they're a leader, they can't really talk to the people on their staff about what's going on. A lot of times there might be uncertain about what direction to take, or maybe they have to make a really tough decision about, say, laying somebody off. They can't talk to anybody on the staff about this. So it gives them a safe place. And also a lot of times they can't really talk to their family or friends about it either, right? Because maybe if they've been sort of complaining about work a lot, their family doesn't want to hear it, you know.
Yeah.
So having an objective person to talk about, I think, is helpful. And then the external environment, like how are you going to have an impact on that? So, being held accountable. Importantly, also celebrating milestones and achievements, because for a lot of high achieving people, they might break a sales record or do something really amazing. And they're like, okay, what's next? Right. And I really try to get them to say, no, let's stop for a moment and acknowledge that this was amazing and you made this happen. Because a lot of times people that are super talented think that they're just average. And I'm like, no, you're not. And that helps them have more confidence if they can recognize that they did something amazing. And then the third environment is helping them navigate the office politics. Because for many people, they're like, I was just in this meeting and there was something weird that happened. I have no idea what was going on. And to help them sort of step back and think about what might motivate people who are around them, or to see the bigger picture. A lot of times people do not step back and look at those interrelationships. And once they understand that, and then they can learn to play the game. This is why I called my book "Winning the Game of Work," is that there's a lot more going on than probably what you realize. And when you step back and start to see it, you can make more intentional choices about what you do. And then there's the mindset part of this as well. So making sure that you stay in a positive mindset, and that's probably one of the most important things, because I think of in our lives, we only have so much energy. And if say you fill up a bucket, and this is filled with energy, and when you do things you enjoy, more energy goes into it. But when you are stressed, or you don't get enough sleep, or whatever, anything that's sort of negative, it's almost like poking holes in the bottom of the bucket. And so like energy is just dripping out. And so when it's time to get up and go to work or deal with something, and you look and there's like hardly any energy left, right? This is what happens when we go into burnout, that the bucket's empty.
Yeah.
So those little stresses and so forth, a lot of times can be shifted by shifting your mindset and starting to like identify what's the belief that's causing me to feel stressed or anxious or to worry. If we can replace that belief with something different, and then a lot of times people show up in a much more resilient way, where they can recover more quickly from, hard things that happen in their workday.
Wow. Thank you for sharing the depth there of the coaching as well, because I mean, like you said about the safe environment, that was something that was really that stuck out to me, because I mean, this could be an incorrect American stereotype, but it seems to me from a British point of view, if you're a leader in America, especially in corporate American business, strength is something that you have to show as your persona. And like you said before, if you identify a leader as strong, you can show that vulnerability. So it's great that they can have that safe place with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that you're right about that. That's a stereotype. And I think depending on the industry, that in order to be taken seriously, they have to at least show up that way, but they don't always feel that way.
Yeah.
And they can't sort of let their hair down and be vulnerable in front of their team. And especially, depending on what challenges they're facing at work,
Yeah.
they
Does this
can't say
differ?
like, go ahead.
Sorry. Does this differ from male and female leaders as well? Is there much more of a difficulty accessing that if you have a male client than a female client who may be a little bit more open and vulnerable because they feel like they can be? Whereas if a male client does open up, I think the culture is changing a little bit more now, and males are starting to be a bit more open, but there may be, like you said before, about shame. They don't want to open
Hmm.
up and admit that they need help, and especially if they don't want any of their peers to find out that they are actually seeking that help and coaching.
Yeah. Um, there are some patterns that I tend to see. I think probably the biggest one that I tend to see is that women worry more about being liked, and sometimes may have trouble with boundaries. So they'll say yes to things, or they won't. Especially if they've recently been promoted. But I see this as with men too. I don't want to make it only about
Yeah.
a gender thing, but a lot of times when people have recently been promoted, that it might take some time for them to mentally promote themselves and to feel comfortable using the levers of power that they have at their disposal. And so sometimes I'm really trying to help them shift to say, you don't need to do that yourself. In fact, that's not a good use of your time. You need to learn to delegate that. And I probably see this more with women than men, but I do see it with men too, where they'll say, well, it's just faster for me to do it. I should just do this. And I have to make them realize that their time is very, very valuable. And that even though, yes, you might be able to do that more quickly, if somebody is making a quarter of the amount of money that you're making, if it takes them twice as long to do it as it takes you, you're still saving the company money, and there's a big opportunity cost in terms of that leader not working on the things that only they can do,
Yeah.
you know.
Relinquishing that control.
Yeah, exactly. And so, just getting comfortable with that and realizing that they can build the processes and they can decide, you know, the way it's going to go. If they have authority over their department, they can change things, they can reassign people, they can put new processes in place, they can, change the rules. It's up to them. They can do that. And sometimes it takes a while for them to wake up to that and be like, oh, wow, if this doesn't work, you mean I can change it so it does work? Yeah.
Fascinating. What we're going to do is just before we move on to the questions from Instagram and myself, we're going to talk about the fruition phase, which is the final stage in the purpose cycle, but it also does ignite that aspiration phase. So it's basically what you are reaping now from the foundations you've set, like you said, in 2017 when you began this journey. And what has that triggered for the future? Is there maybe another book in the future that you'd like to write?
Mm-hmm.
And what further plans do you have?
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like I like the whole idea of fruition,
Yeah.
because I do feel like I'm sort of blossoming in a way,
Yeah.
and it's gradual in the
Yeah.
way of, that how blossoms open up. And, I think I launched a podcast, and that happened pretty quickly. It really just came out of a conversation with one of my clients. And I was like, wow, this is an interesting conversation. And I like marketing. I like talking to marketers. I have a lot of clients who are marketers. I'm just gonna start this. And one of the things that I really love about it is that I just realized I love this, and things that I think are interesting, other people will probably think are interesting too. And I just decided to do it because I wanted to do it. And there's really something that feels wonderful about doing something like that, like not worrying about what other people think or if this is the right thing to do. And my podcast is a little infant. It's just, I only have 3 episodes out. I have a few more in the can, But so far, people are saying, "Wow, that I listened to that. That was great." So it's really validating to get the kind of feedback that that people are experiencing it in the way that I was hoping that it would be received. It's nice.
Amazing. Any plans to do any more writing or blogging or anything like that?
I have thought about doing another book. I'm not actually, one of the things I might do more quickly is I actually have exercises in the book, and I have been thinking ever since I published it that I might pull those out and have them be a companion workbook, because right now they're just questions in there, but actually make it a workbook and illustrate it and give people room to actually answer the questions in the book. I'm also actually, I was really gung-ho right after the book came out. I was recording the audio book, and I got to my book is 12 chapters, and I got to chapter 11, and then I don't know what happened. I only have one more chapter to record, and then I can put the audio book out. And that's, I think I'm just going to say it right here. I'm just going to commit right here on your show.
Amazing.
This is going to come out in 2021. I'm going to finish this.
Amazing.
So,
Purpose Cycle exclusive right there. We've got the Winning the Game of Work audiobook coming out in 2021. Fantastic. Well, I wish you all the best with those fruitions, and I'm sure, and I'm really positive that they will come to fruition. And one of the reasons why I wanted to call it that stage rather than fulfillment was because these things do blossom, but we're never really quite satisfied. We want to progress ourselves and level up and continue to progress. So it's great that you have all of those plans. I've got some questions from Instagram, and the first one is a really, really interesting question, actually. So I'm looking forward to hearing your answer. How do you know if you're going through the motions at work?
How do you know? If you're even asking that question, I think the answer is you're just going through the motions at work. One of the things I think is really interesting when people come to me about potentially working with me as a coach, and they say, oh, I'm really unhappy, and I'll say, well, what is it that you really want? Like, what would make you happy? And they say, I don't know. I just don't know. And I believe everyone on some level does know what they want, but many times we will block ourselves from bringing it to our consciousness because there's fear there. We're afraid of change. We're afraid of all of the things that could happen if we give ourselves permission to go after the things that we want. And I think that's very natural, right? Like, we don't want to do, I always say, like, I'm never going to say to somebody, like, sell all of your belongings and trek across India or something, right? That doesn't make sense. We've got to be like practical. But what I also would say is, like, allow your desires to emerge, allow them to live. Don't kill your dreams before they've been able to live in the world a little bit. And so often people will say, well, I really want to do this, but here's 20 reasons why I can't do that. And I say, no, like, these are separate. What do you want to do? Just put that to the side. Okay. Yeah. We haven't figured out if you're going to do it or how you're going to do it, but just allow that to live. And then separately say, well, if I was going to do that, what would I need to do to make that happen? And, maybe you're never going to get that. But if you start exploring what you would need to do that, it might be a lot more possible than what you think. Or you start on the journey and you find something different that also satisfies you. Yeah. And this is what life's about, right? Let's see what's out there.
Yeah, the pursuit of it will be exciting as well. It's that desire, isn't it? Burning desire to seek and find the unknown, as it were. Mm-hmm. Next question. Do you have to change careers to be happy?
No, absolutely not. And I really love that question because, we've all heard that saying that perception is reality. And if we change our perception, we change our reality. The way that we experience the world is based on our beliefs, our beliefs are really the lens through which we look at the world.
Yeah.
And you can change that lens. I'm not saying that it's easy or that it's automatic or you snap your fingers, but over time, if you find yourself like reacting, kind of knee-jerk reaction to things again and again, and you don't like what's happening when you do that, get curious about what is it underneath of this. When I respond that way, what's the belief that comes to my mind? Right.
Yeah.
And then once that belief is sort of like risen to the conscious level, say to yourself, like, is that really true? Where did I get that idea from? And, I'll just give you like just a quick example of, are you married, Jonathan?
Engaged to be married, yes.
Engaged.
Yeah,
Okay.
nearly.
So you've got a significant other, and
Yeah.
I'm married, and there have been many, many times in my life where my husband and I have like been together and experienced something together or witnessed something, and we've had vastly different responses to it, right? Like where
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's horrible. Can you believe it? And he's like, what is the big deal? Right? Like and the reason why we're responding to it differently is because we have different beliefs. Okay. We saw the same thing, but the difference was what our belief was.
Yeah.
And if you look around the workplace, like there's a lot of times that people, one person is like cracking under the pressure and another person's like, no big deal, I'm just going to go out to the pub tonight, like they're not affected by the stress
Yeah.
because they're thinking differently. So and I guess the other thing I would say too is that some people get their fulfillment from work, like that's a very important part of their life. And other people are like, it's just a job. And my fulfillment comes from other things.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely fine. I mean, for me personally, my career was really important to me. And a lot of people that I work with, it's very important to them.
Yeah.
But, it doesn't have to be. It can be just a job.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. Well, great insight there. I really liked the perception idea as well, and something
yeah.
that really I haven't thought about too much before. But yeah, two people can see two different, one event completely differently. So that's
Yep.
incredible insight. I'm going to come on to my questions now. These are the questions that we ask every guest towards the end of the Purpose Cycle podcast. First of all, what 3 values, if you had to choose 3 values, do you say you stand by?
Let's see. I think that kindness is important to me, or kindness / respect. Having respect for every person and treating them
Yeah.
kindly. That's important to me. Meeting that person where they are and recognizing that they've got a right to be. Independence is really important to me as well. I think independence of thought, independence of finding your own way, like that's always been very, very important to me. And let's see what else. Personally, I'm super curious, so learning is very important to me too.
Yeah.
And I would say like learning / variety. I love being surprised. I love, just learning something that I never knew before, or looking at something from a different perspective is really interesting.
Fantastic. Well, as a school teacher by day, that's some brilliant values there, which I like to try and pass on to my class, to my kids that I teach. So some wonderful ones there. I'm going to sort of steal one of the Instagram questions and merge it with a question of my own, because I usually ask listeners, I usually ask guests how listeners can make the next 12 months their year. But what I'm going to do is one of the questions from Instagram: how do listeners win the game of work?
Well, start by figuring out what you want.
Yeah.
And really taking a look at where you are right now and whether your current career is fulfilling what you would like it to out of your life. So that's really the first step. And if it's not, and then you can start imagining like what it would take to get you to a place where you're going to be more satisfied and happier with how you're investing your time and your life.
A great answer there. Fantastic. And the last question of the Pepper Cycle podcast, where can listeners find you and where can listeners find your book and your services?
They can find me on my website at terrybmcdougall.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, and my handle's terrybmcdougall.com, or I mean, Terry B. McDougall, sorry. And my book is available worldwide on Amazon.
Fantastic. Well, I encourage listeners, like I have done, to get yourself a copy of Winning the Game of Work. I can't wait to read it and really develop myself. I'm currently really, really satisfied with my job and how I'm doing and how I'm progressing. And you don't have to be dissatisfied with your work to get the book and learn. You can be highly, happy and successful and continue to progress. And I think that was one of the main key points from here. You don't have to be in a bad place to receive coaching, receive help and progress. You can be a high performer and still want to get better and still want to progress further. So Terry, thank you so much for joining us on the Purpose Cycle podcast.
Jonathan, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Watch me not stop though.